What's up, guys? We're back. I want to welcome you to the channel. We are How About This? My name is Evan.
And I'm Stone.
Our channel is for all things kind of spooky, you know. We talk about scary stories and we'll go on cool adventures to see spooky things.
Yeah. And since we are new, we would really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe and share with your friends.
Try to keep things funny. Also do some reactions to scary movies and stuff.
We love scary movies.
So with that, we'll start our video. We're going to be talking about some urban myths, spooky stories, things like that.
I guess I could start with the first urban legend. This comes from the famed Reddit user Corolla801 talks about a Utah urban legend called the Skull Valley Lights. And I actually don't know where Skull Valley is. It's somewhere between Dugway and Salt Lake City.
So large area.
Yeah, I guess it's a pretty large area. I've never been there personally, but the Reddit user talks about how the story goes that if you're driving alone at night through the Skull Valley, you might see the Skull Valley Lights. The story goes, you're driving along in the dark, and then a car comes up behind you. They'll start flashing their brights at you. Then they finally pull up around you to pass. When the car gets up to the side, you see that the headlights are actually eyes of a demon who promptly asks you to sell him your soul. So apparently this is a very deep urban legend that's told around campfires. Since we're actually from Utah, I've never been to Skull Valley, so I think that'd be something fun to check out.
I'm down. And Dugway is also a spooky place.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know. We'll dive into this later. It's considered the new Area 51. A lot of wacky stuff goes down there.
So that's it for the Skull Valley Lights. Yeah.
That sounds interesting. I want to go check those out now.
Yeah, me too. We should definitely
find some lights.
Do a road trip down there.
I mean, I'm super down. I mean, Dugway's only 2 hours top of the year. It's like right smack dab in the middle of Utah.
I've actually never been to Dugway, so.
I've been just outside of Dugway on a camping trip. Okay, I've got a story for you guys. It's fairly well known. It's known as the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's a fairly famous mystery that happened in the 1950s to a group of Russian hikers who were exploring and hiking through an unnamed mountain. At the time, I guess the area wasn't named anything. And they were led by Igor Dyatlov, who was the namesake of the pass after this incident. There were initially 10 people who were traveling with this group, and with his account and through journal entries and photographs, people were able to piece together kind of the journey that they had. The journey itself really wasn't all that eventful, but after it was about a month where they didn't return home, there was nothing that was heard from them. They went out and searched for these hikers, and what they found was pretty disturbing and really weird. First, they found a tent that was torn to shreds, just totally thrashed, and analysis of the fibers and stuff and how it was torn. They discovered that it was torn from the inside, and I want to remind you that this happened in the middle of winter, where temperatures dropped -30 to -40 degrees Celsius, like absolutely freezing. And they searched around and they eventually spotted footprints of 8 or 9 individuals, most of which didn't have any sign of footwear on. At the most of these people had on were socks as they ran. Something had spooked these hikers so much that they tore open their tent and ran out into these freezing temperatures in like knee-deep snow in very little clothing. No shoes, mostly just like socks and stuff. Most of them died via hypothermia, but there were a few who were killed in more gruesome ways, which adds to the mystery of the situation. At the edge of the forest, under a large cedar tree, the investigators found the remains of the first 2 dead bodies. Both of them were found shoeless and wearing only their underwear, and they had died from hypothermia. Bodies had no severe external damage. One of them had a brown-purple complexion and a gray foam coming from his cheek and a gray liquid coming out of his mouth. They couldn't quite figure out why they were under the cedar tree, and the branches above them were kind of torn to pieces. Another one had head injuries consistent with someone who had fallen and hit his head over and over. She had a baton-shaped bruise on her side. Then they had found 3 more bodies. second group of bodies had died at a distinctly different time than the first ones. One had wrapped their foot in some wool pants that someone else had. The other one had a fur coat and a hat on that belonged to another person in the journey. And one of the mysterious things about it was the clothes of both the people that they found had been radioactive. The remaining hikers were discovered buried in the snow about 75 meters into the woods than the people at the cedar tree, in a place that they had built, kind of a little den of sorts. One of them suffered significant skull damage in the moments right before his death. Two more had major chest fractures. Almost all the bones in their chest had been shattered, and the coroners decided that it wasn't in a way that was similar to like blunt force trauma from like a bat or a club or something. It was closer to what was consistent with a high-speed car accident or an explosion. The most gruesome death that they found was one of the hikers was missing her tongue, eyes, parts of her lips, as well as facial tissue, and a piece of her skull was missing. And they found that there was large amounts of her own blood inside of her stomach, suggesting that her tongue was removed while she was still alive. And the whole area had an unusual amount of radiation in the area. A lot of theories that have sprung from this have been military experiments all the way up to extraterrestrial intervention. There's been no satisfactory answers given to explain the gruesome murders of some of these people. At the time, the Soviet government was pretty hush-hush about it. We still don't have a whole lot of answers. It's the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Really weird.
That sounds pretty creepy. And you said that happened in Russia. So I actually lived in Eastern Europe for about 2 years, and I know how cold it gets out there, and so I wouldn't imagine that they would have survived very long with that little of clothing out in the...
And the thing is, they were all experienced. They were all trained and certified for extreme hiking and wilderness.
This next urban legend that we're going to talk about is I've actually been to the area where this originates from. It's in Oklahoma City, and my dad actually took me there when I was, I think maybe I was 9 or 10 years old. I'm around that age. My dad actually has some personal experience with this urban legend. It's called the Hatchet House or Carey Place. It goes by many different names. So when my dad moved to Oklahoma City with his family, he and his friends would hear about this area that kids would call the Twilight Zone, kind of nicknamed after the old series, The Twilight Zone. After some extensive research on this area, they found this street within Oklahoma City. It was a neighborhood called Carey Place. At the entrance of the street, there is this sign. It's a metal sign with some Gothic-looking letters that tells, that this is Carey Place. And my dad goes on to say that at first it seems like, it's just a normal neighborhood, well-lit houses, well-kept lawns, everything. But the only thing that was a little eerie was that they did not see any sign of life anywhere. You'd see lights on in the houses, TVs going, but they wouldn't see anyone like outside in the lawns. They couldn't see anyone in the windows. It was just creepy. And my dad also says that they got kind of this claustrophobic feeling because it seemed that the houses were built very close to the street. And they still didn't really understand why this place was called the Twilight Zone. They didn't understand, why kids at their school would talk about this like it's some big, fascinating thing. Like it did give off this eerie vibe, but they didn't understand why. My dad goes on to say that he and some of his friends were telling one of their friends' moms about this place. They decided to drive through it one night. One evening, my dad and his friends decide to take their friend's mom to this neighborhood, and they're driving through the street, and they all talk about, all these houses look really nice. Their friend's mother agrees. She's like, they all look really nice except for that house, and she was pointing to a house just to the right of their car that they were driving in. My dad goes on to say it looks dark and foreboding, while all the other houses on that block seem completely harmless. They just took it with silence, not knowing how to respond to that comment. After a few years, my dad's friend worked at a radio station. He goes on a local radio station, and one of his co-workers used to live in that neighborhood. so he knew the legend about the neighborhood. And he says that the houses tell the story. According to my dad's friend, their mutual friend, the story revolves around a young girl named Carrie Sanner, and it's believed that she was about between the ages of 14 and 16 years old, so pretty young. The story takes place in the fall, close to Halloween. So Carrie had been walking home from school with a group of friends, and they decided to stop at the park and play on the playground. After a while, her friends continued to go home, but Carrie decided, I'm gonna stay and swing. So before too long, Carrie actually loses track of time, and she notices that it's gotten pretty dark. It's pretty late, so as she leaves the playground to head home, she seems to be aware of a dark, shadowy figure following her home from the playground. So she decides to, I'm gonna walk a little bit faster, and she notices behind her that the shadowy figure, we don't know if this is like a person, a man, a woman, we don't know who it is keeping pace with her. Carrie nearly reaches the safety of her own home. She was suddenly overtaken in her own front yard. The shadowy assailant assaulted her with an axe, and while Carrie screams for help, either her screams for help went unheard, or no one paid attention, they just ignored. Several houses on Carrie Place have red paint in the driveways. The legend goes that this is reportedly where Carrie's blood had been spilled, could never be cleaned up, so they decided that they would cover up the blood by painting the driveways red. Carrie's dismembered body was actually found in her front yard, but her head was missing. This house is marked with the designs of medieval executioner axes cut out as decorations in the window shutters. And I've actually been there. My dad drove me and my brother and my cousin through that neighborhood. I remember I don't remember too much about it, but I remember it was just really creepy. It was a really creepy feeling.
That's weird.
And it's said that Carrie's head turned up weeks later in a flower box several houses down the street. And now the scary thing about this is when my dad's friend is telling them this legend, they're at Carrie Place, they're at the street, they're driving through the street. The house at the end of the street was the same house that my dad's friend's mother pointed out, that house is really creepy. They noticed that at the top was a flower box, above the door was a flower box on a balcony. So that is suspected to be where Carrie's head was found.
Wow.
After that, they drive through the neighborhood, and my dad's friend says, let me show you the house that isn't on Carrie Place, isn't on this street, but it's part of the legend. So they go to this house. It's all bricked up now. You can't see in it, he explains. But when he lived in that area, people used to be able to see underneath the porch, and there was a plaque that was visible, and it said Carrie S. So people suspected that that's where her remains were buried. So yeah, I've actually been there. I've been to this area. It's been many years. It's been over a decade, but I just remember being so creeped out. It was so scary. I'd like to go back again sometime. So maybe we can plan a road trip or something down to Oklahoma and taking a look at it.
You could say Carrie started her adventure on a swing.
Yeah, she started
and ended her adventure with another swing.
Yeah. Oh.
All right. Okay. How about this for the final story we have today? That's something that's really freaking wild. This is the story of the Saratina Entity. So back in the 90s in Bulgaria, their Ministry of Defense carried out a excavation operation. Nearby village of Saratina is where it was being located at, and they were influenced, I guess, by some a medium and superstition and stuff. It's kind of weird how they decided to go and dig there, but psychic mediums and superstitions convinced the Ministry of Defense to start digging around this area for gold treasure that was supposedly there since medieval times. For 2 years, the military dug a 180-meter long tunnel, and then suddenly they quit and buried the hole in tons of concrete. Why did they pack up and leave so much? The non-manipulated information that has come out from the people who participated in this cause for interesting things. They say things had happened there. Colonel Svetko Kanev wrote a book called the Saratina Phenomenon. Anyway, so they found this rectangular slab in the ground. It was identified by a remote viewer, a psychic person who claims the ability to see things at a distance. And she claimed it was some sort of biological protection slab. They eventually discovered that dangerous bacteria had been on this slab, not only on the slab, but like engraved into the slab. So they decided that it'd be best to dig around the slab instead of trying to break through it, because they were scared they were going to release some sort of bacteria. And so they dug a few meters lower, and they discovered another barrier, a slab in the shape of a concave lens that was referenced by another person to have been made out of some sort of unknown metal. To the right of this slab, they discovered something, a humanoid figure in the wall whose size would dwarf any normal human. They continued to dig down, and they broke through this metal slab, and they were hit by a powerful beam of light that came out of the ground. They were shocked and stunned, but after recovering, they found themselves in a tunnel about 1.5 meters high, so not very big. The floor of this tunnel was kind of a silvery gray metal, and the walls were extremely smooth, but covered in a unknown writing. Some sort of language was written on the walls, but they couldn't identify it. The colonel claims that one of his soldiers tried on 3 separate occasions to enter a certain spot in this tunnel, but was pushed back and knocked over each time by some invisible wall or some unknown force. And so that's what he claims was in this tunnel. And fearing the unknown and the indescribable dangers that they had uncovered in this hole, that's what made them leave and bury it in tons of concrete. Theories ranged around the idea that this humanoid creature was an ancestor to mankind. Another theory says that this being was receiving transmissions from a star known as SS-433, about 11,000 light years away. Also had noticed that there were at least 15 appearances of UFOs sighted in the area during the time of this excavation. One was a series of pulsing lights that descended behind the hills, and the other one was a light that seemed to scan the region. In July of 1993, a scientific expedition led from the University of Sofia began to investigate the region. They brought powerful equipment, binoculars, sensitive film, recording equipment, and gear to trace for electromagnetic radiation. They worked for about 20 days in this Saratina area. They had a lot of interesting phenomena that happened. They watched 2 limited appearances of poltergeists, and they recorded at least 21 encounters with UFOs, one of which was a pumpkin-shaped object that radiated a white light that flew over the camp. And 36 hours later, they saw a oval-shaped object that was glowing blue kind of move above the tents that they were at. Another 36 hours later, they were preparing a fire for dinner, but the fire started acting strange. They left it unattended for about 4 minutes, but they turned around and they noticed that the fire had expanded in a semicircle out toward the camp. And with the help of the local fire brigade, about an hour and a half later, they put out the fire. They noticed the strange because the fire only expanded toward the camp and didn't expand anywhere toward the forest or buried hole that they were at. And they noticed that there was a strong wind that appeared only during the fire, when they had built the fire, and went away as soon as they put it out. To also note some of the weird things that have happened. The 36-hour thing is part of a theory that there was some sort of alien intelligence that was manipulating people through a psychic means that took about 36 hours to affect individuals, and they were wanting to protect whatever was there. They also noted that after the Sunray operation concluded, the psychic who did the remote viewing of the initial slab that had the bacteria on it, committed suicide very shortly after this thing. So what did she see? What kind of information did she hear? What kind of information is the Bulgarian government hiding in this situation? Is any of this actually real? Or is this just some publicity stunt put on by the people to sell books? Yeah, the answers we'll never truly know unless we can find a way to dig through that concrete slab. But if it causes a person to commit suicide, I don't know if we want to do that.
That's a bit sketchy.
Ooh.
And you said this taking place in Bulgaria.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of that legend, you mentioned that it was led by like superstition and like and theories and stuff like that. Eastern Europeans are very superstitious. I've heard a lot of really crazy stories of their superstitions. We can cover that in another video, but yeah, they are pretty adamant about their superstitions out there. So
there's just some wild stuff out there, man, and we're excited to bring it to you guys. Bring all the stuff that you don't normally hear about, and to bring you some good times watching some spooky videos and going on some crazy adventures.
Yeah, we really appreciate you guys watching our video, and leave a comment down below if you've what your favorite urban legend is, or scary stories, or if you've ever experienced anything pretty creepy.
If you have any suggestions for any horror movies we should watch with our wives who are not necessarily into horror, so that would be fun. So give us a like, little subscribe,
Yeah, stay creepy.
Stay creepy, dogs.